This Steve Jones Show podcast is now loading. The Steve Jones Show podcast is presented by Sunbury Motor Company, Purdy Insurance, and Brewers Outlet. Bringing you an in-depth look at Penn State sports and more. This is the Steve Jones Show on News Radio 1070 WKOK. The Steve Jones Show is presented by Sunbury Motor Company, Purdy Insurance, and Brewers Outlet. Now from the Sunbury Motor Studio, here's Steve Jones.
And this half hour being brought to you by Brewers Outlet, Reagan Street, Sunbury, the beverage supermarket. Imports, domestics, microbrews, the best selection of beer anywhere. Wine coolers, water, soft drinks, snacks. They roast their peanuts fresh and out every day. 6 great flavors of slushies and ready-to-drink cocktails. High Noon Jack Daniel's Crown Royal. Pickle Bar led by the Barrels and the Dills. Indeed, second to none. All at Brewers Outlet, Reagan Street, Sunbury, the beverage supermarket. All right, with that, we bring in the outstanding Neal Coolong. Sir, welcome. Great to have you back.
As always, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
All right, so I talked to Pat Fryermuth last week, and we were at a function together, and I leaned over to Pat and I said, how many people at this place have asked you about Aaron Rodgers? He looked at me and said, Steve, all of them. Of course. Did you see the story today or the comment today by Ryan Clark? And, when people make comments, they just want to get noticed, that Mike Tomlin and Aaron Rodgers have underachieved in their careers? Neal, does anybody realize how hard it is to win?
I think it's here was my thought on it. If you go back 20 years and say these are the careers of these two people, a coach and a player, are we going to say that they underachieved? Probably not. But the real issue is you have to grade everything today in the NFL on the Belichick and Brady scale. Especially these are one coach that struggled enormously to beat Belichick and Brady, and one quarterback that had, arguably as much, if not more, talent than any other passer who ever lived. And he only won one, and it was a long time ago. I would argue it's not just coaching, it's not just quarterback play. It's the presence of a lot of things. And in some cases, it's the absence of that legendary status of your opponents. The Legion of Boom, which was really kind of they stood in a similar path of opposition to Rodgers' Packers back in the day and the Patriots of that 25-year run.
Right.
Those are pretty formidable opponents.
No doubt.
That's tough to beat. So to say that they underachieved is to say they should have beaten those teams. Now, whether Ryan Clark feels that way about his Steelers, or I can understand where that might come from. But Rodgers, his teams did not lose because he underperformed or he underwhelmed or anything like that. In most cases, they got beat by a good team.
Right.
I think Russell Wilson's a Hall of Fame level player. They beat him, I think, twice in championship games. It's not easy to climb that hill, like you said. But you look at the overall success that both of them had. I don't know how you could possibly. I don't know what your expectations were for either one of them. But in January of 2007, when Tomlin was hired, I don't think anybody saw the career that he's had coming out in front of him. 2 Super Bowl appearances, 1 win. Rodgers being drafted in the late 20s, starting his career in junior college. I don't think anybody thought that he was going to be, maybe in some regards, considered to be the best quarterback who ever played. It's hard to be underwhelming if that's your resume, just my opinion. But to what you said, this is the deadest time of the year in the football calendar, news-wise. It's what we call in the business the Rushmore weeks, when everybody comes up with their Mount Rushmore of whatever trope you have to talk about during this time. This is when you bring it out because there's not really anything else to go on. That type of comment is a Rushmore comment. I don't know how sincere he is with that, or if it's even worth the conversation. But millions of people are listening to him, so maybe that's the path I got to take.
Well, in other words, did the Oakland Raiders in the 70s underachieve? Did John Madden underachieve? Or was his problem the Pittsburgh Steelers?
Exactly it, in my opinion. You can't look past that. To act as if the legends that got the better of them during that time nullify their existence in history, I think it's silly. I think that the closest equivalent you can go to is the Buffalo Bills. To go to 4 straight Super Bowls,
right.
We're all over the Chiefs for going to 3, and they have
right.
a chance to go to a 4th now. That's a legendary team. I get that they didn't win any, but still, the accomplishment itself is something to marvel at because nobody else does that. It's not common at all. To act as if they're somehow less because of only winning 1 Super Bowl, I think is just silly. It really is just more because Belichick and Brady completely destroyed the bell curve. We have to remember that and kind of take them out of historical context. It's just not relevant. They're way above and beyond everybody else. Nobody can argue with that. That does not mean Mike Tomlin has not had a sensational career relative to nearly all of his peers. Or Aaron Rodgers, same thing. He's had, 4 MVPs. He's still playing. You got to give him credit for that.
Right. Look, I realize that you make comments along the way to get people to notice you. Okay? I mean, I do understand that. But, I mean, sometimes I see stuff, and if anybody ought to know how hard it is to win, it should be a former player, right?
A former player turned broadcaster might have a different standard of what they're looking to do today. But it might not draw in as much attention if he says, you know what, these guys are still above and beyond everything else, even with all these things, and maybe didn't achieve as much as we would now like to see out of the top guys to even get into the conversation. This is kind of where you need to be, and now they're below it. I don't think that that's the right way to judge it. I don't think history would judge that either, but I think Ryan Clark knows better, and I think Ryan Clark knows better in a lot of instances.
Yeah.
Ryan Clark is also smart enough to know what's going to draw in attention and get people talking about it.
DeShon Elliot, by the way, gets a 2-year deal, $12.5 million. What can he mean to the Steelers moving forward?
I think it's good in the sense that he gives them a sense of depth, not just having somebody out on the field, but there are a lot of things he can do. He's very versatile, probably the most versatile safety that they have had is in that kind of counterpart role. I don't want to say sidekick. I hate that. But the big money safety, Troy Polamalu, Minkah Fitzpatrick, the guys that they have played with alongside, I feel Elliott brings more to both roles of a safety, so they can do more with their primary guy. Him being back there gives them the ability to drop Minkah down into the flat. He can cover short. He can go after the quarterback. He can make instinctive plays on the ball, which is really what they need to get him back to doing. Now, Minkah is one of the best deep safeties, one of the best center field safeties we've seen since Ed Reed. He's fallen off of that a bit over the last couple of years, and I think some of that is utilization. Some of that is the direction the league has taken. They're not throwing as deep as often as they have. That kind of limits his opportunities. You put those things together, it lessens Fitzpatrick's ability, and they need to find a way to scheme him to be in more places. And having Elliott there gives them a backbone in which they can use him in more ways. In other words, they can still run single high if that's what they want to do,
right,
and move Minkah down. That can confuse a quarterback if they're watching only him to dictate what they're doing. We have 2 guys who can do this now. So obviously I'm not saying Elliott is Minkah Fitzpatrick, but he's a very solid NFL safety, and overall it's a very smart signing for the Steelers and kind of a reclamation project for a player that had kind of a rough year before he got to Pittsburgh, and they straightened things out. He fits well with what they're doing. It's turned out to be a valuable asset for him, and I think $6 million on average per year for 2 years is a great deal.
Well, again, this guy's a former 6th-round pick. He's been able to, play well enough in the league to be a factor in the league and be a factor for the Steelers. One of the interesting things, stadiums are always going to be an interesting thing. I know in Cleveland there's a fight net right now between a Dome Stadium and the suburbs and the city wanting to keep them in the limits of Cleveland. Then there's Kansas City. There was that little fight between Missouri and Kansas over whether they would be on one line or the other. Missouri's the one that ends up winning out in this for both the Royals and the Chiefs. What's your thought on that, and what does a team mean to a state, not just to a city?
Kansas City, I think, has always been kind of the outlier. I mean, every year there's a poll that you'll see that a pretty large chunk of NFL fans are not aware necessarily that the Chiefs play in Missouri and not in Kansas. I think that sort of motivates Kansans to say, hey, you know what, we're already there in a way. We already have part of this market. Let's see if we can take it the whole way. But the way I equate that, honestly, is free agency. They have good players. They develop good players. Eventually, the market wants those players. That drives their price up to stay, and that's what happened to the state of Missouri and the city of Kansas City. If you've been to Kansas City, if you've spent time there, you can see how ingrained their pro sports culture is. And the Royals, not as much, obviously a very different situation in a different sport, but they had a very nice run not too long ago, and fans are still kind of nostalgic for that. They still hang on to that. Any one of those players doesn't need to pay for a drink in town, ever. They don't want to lose that culture. It is going to cost a little bit more, considering the Chiefs are the hottest brand going, and it doesn't look like they're really going to settle down anytime soon. They could win another 2 or 3 before it's all said and done. That's going to cost a bit. And with that, Arrowhead Stadium, it gets by on nostalgia for sure. It's a great location in the sense that it's kind of like their presence in Kansas City. There's nothing else there. Both stadiums are across from each other in a concrete jungle. I've been to games for both the Royals and the Chiefs, and it's a very old school, very Midwestern kind of feel. And I don't think making that. They have an investment that they need to make, in my opinion, the city. We are in the age now, and you and I have been talking long enough that we've spanned over the end of the previous era in which it was make the cities pay for everything. They're not going to do that anymore, and I think NFL owners are aware of that. So if they need a stadium built, the owners are going to have to pitch into that. So they are going to look for the best that they can get for the lowest investment possible. That makes you get creative, and that's kind of what Cleveland is doing. If the city wants them to stay in Cleveland proper, which I'm not 100% sure that's the best idea for everything. There's more land. It's cheaper. You can build a better and bigger facility to host more things if you get outside of the city limits where you're kind of locked in. But downtown Cleveland, I'm sure you've been there multiple times as well. It's kind of odd without that stadium. It's the fixture of Cleveland, despite the success that they have in other sports and the excitement that's there for it. The Browns have really kind of been the centralized focus of everything. And maybe that part of that is, we lost this once, we're not going to let it go again. And they've had a miserable team with a ginormous fan base that supports the organization despite not having gotten really anything in 30 years. So I can see why the team would want them to play in the best stadium that they could, but at the same time, it's like, well, there's a give and take. Not everything can just be moved to the suburbs. It does take away a cultural element that I think is very important overall. Now, I'm not a mayor. I'm not in politics. I'm just saying I think it's best when a team, certainly one named after the city, should be in the city that they're playing in. It makes the city better, more vibrant. There are economic studies that show both things, really, that there is an economic impact, but it's not proven as well because you don't really have anything that says these dollars would be spent on something else if they weren't there. But I do think it legitimizes a city in a way that draws people in. It makes people want to see the other things that are there and gives them a reason to want to build it up. And I think Cleveland is a nice city. It's a good place to be. As much fun as people, and myself included, make fun of it, they're not better off with that in the suburbs. But a dome stadium for a place like that, for a business that they have to pay for, that does make sense. So I see that going either way. That's tough. In the end, the city's going to have to pay for them to stay in Cleveland. I think that's part of what the Browns are wanting to do. If they can get some money from the city / the state, maybe they will stay with the idea of exploring a roof just so they can put other events in there.
Well, I think that Washington is a good example of this. Now I realize ownership, how they've handled things under Dan Snyder. Okay, that's a problem. But they're tarped off seats in Landover. Now they're going to move back to downtown D.C. At the site of the old RFK. It's going to be a dome, which means they can host the college football playoff. They can host the NCAAs and football. In Cleveland, the idea is to build a dome outside the city. The question is, does the city itself counter with a dome? Because, again, it gives you the flexibility I just talked about, including concerts.
Yeah, that's my point. I think to some degree, if they aren't doing it, I don't want to act as if they're being disingenuous in their negotiations, but wanting a dome, if you're paying for most, if not all of it, the dome only makes sense for you as a team owner because you want to be able to put in other venues. Concerts in January aren't all that great outside in Cleveland. They know that. So you want to be able to use that as much as you can. It's the same negotiation that happened in Minnesota, back in Minneapolis, I should say, back in the day when the league really kind of strong-armed the state government to raise taxes to be able to pay for it. They're way over schedule on that. The deal worked out, I think, even better than they thought that it would, and halfway through the loan, they're already talking about how they can use that tax for something else. In a stadium, it's great. It's part of the agreement is they have to host all the state championship football games. They do graduations there for the area larger schools. They put a community feel behind it. If it's Jimmy Haslam and family owning the Dome Stadium in the suburbs of Cleveland, you hope that they still do that kind of thing. But giving up the independence of having the stadium basically on your own versus having the city pay for the dome and keeping it downtown, it really, I think, is going to come down to business needs, stuff that we don't necessarily know about. But there's a lot of value in that, not having to pay for the dome. But I think they want the dome basically to say, this is what we want, this is what we're going to do. If you want to do this for us, you have to pay for you're going to have to pay for the roof. That's going to incentivize us to come back to Cleveland. Otherwise, a lot of these guys, Stan Kroenke kind of started this. They're real estate moguls. He bought an NFL team to own the real estate that's around it. It's what Dallas did. That's what the Wilfs tried to do in Minnesota. Didn't really work out that way, but they're real estate developers. They tried to build a stadium in the suburbs, and they wanted to own everything that was out there. And they settled for their own practice facility outside of the Minneapolis area, and they own all of that. They've got a hotel there. They've got commercial businesses and stuff, and it's a tourist attraction. I could see why an owner would want to do that if they had the opportunity to do it with a stadium. The question is, how liquid are they? How much cash do they have to pay for all of that? Las Vegas, as you might recall, ran into some issues. They ended up being about a year behind in building their megaplex, which is in downtown Las Vegas. With the idea in mind that they weren't going to own everything, but they invested far more than other teams would have in building the stadium. Now they own it all, but it took them a bit to come up with that money in order to do it. It's a lot of money, and I know the franchise is worth this, but it's not like they can sell off 10% of the franchise, and they couldn't at least. Maybe that's why they can do that now. Recent rule changes say they can get in with investment groups to sell off minority stakes. I think that's to raise cash, try to take some out of these exploding valuations of NFL teams. Wouldn't be surprised to see Cleveland do that if they are forced out of it. By choice. they're not getting the deal they want in the downtown area, sell off 5% stake to an investment group, get that cash to help build your own stadium. They'd make that back pretty quick, I would imagine.
Always a pleasure, no matter what topic I throw at you. Neal, thanks so much.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, guys.
And this half hour brought to you by our good friends at Brewers Outlet, Reagan Street in Sunbury, the beverage supermarket. Imports, domestics, microbrews, the best selection of beer anywhere. Wine coolers, water, soft drinks, snacks. They roast their peanuts fresh and out every day. Pickle bar led by the barrels and the dills, indeed second to none on News Radio 1070 WKOK.
Hi, this is Season. For over 100 years, the Purdy Insurance Agency has been protecting families and businesses of the greater Susquehanna Valley and beyond. With the experience of our trained and knowledgeable staff, you can rest assured that your needs will be evaluated and met by some of the industry's best representatives. No matter what your insurance needs are, call Purdy Insurance today at 570-286-5855. Visit our website at purdyinsurance.com or check us out on Facebook to see what we can do for you.
When car repairs get difficult.
Well, I just don't know.
Me neither.
We get good. Sunbury Motors. More than quality new and used cars, Sunbury Motors specializes in complicated auto repair diagnosis. They can handle intricate repairs and even complete auto body with service open Monday through Friday, 7 till 4. And Sunbury Motors has made simple repairs easy. Maintaining your vehicle is necessary. Finding the time to do it is difficult. Welcome to Sunbury Motors Quick Lane. Just walk in or call ahead. Relax in their remodeled waiting room with Wi-Fi, beverages, and snacks. Will Sunbury Motors factory-trained techs take care of your oil change, tire alignments, brakes, and inspections. Quick Lane, 6:30 to 6 Monday through Friday, Saturday 6:30 till 2. Sunbury Motors, Ford and Hyundai, North 4th Street, Sunbury. And Sunbury Motors Kia, routes 11 and 15 in Hummel's Wharf. We take the out of auto repair.